You may have a harder time trying to place a face. Here's your look at the Mattel Master Universe Origins Many Faces. Modernizing and celebrating the original 80s Master Universe action figures, Master Universe Origins gives you the power to pose Eternia's greatest warriors as retro-style figures or in an all-new action-packed battle positions. Before we check out a trio of faces, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall Many Faces stands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tape measure right to the very top of his domed head, right there. According to the readout, Many Faces stands 5.9 inches in height. So he's about 6 inches in height. Switching that over to centimeters, the figure stands 15.1 centimeters tall. You want comparisons? I got your comparisons right here. Here he is next to He-Man, of course, one of the earliest figures we had a look at, slightly scaled differently. Here he is next to Teela. I can get Teela's stand. Teela actually is the only Master Universe Origins figure I've really had some real tough time dealing with, mostly just in her legs. We've also had a look at Man-at-Arms. Pardon my hairy arm, by the way. Here he is next to Roboto. Here he is next to Clamp Champ, a figure we just recently had a look at. And why not? We'll bring in Battle Armor He-Man as well. You could certainly award, I think, Many Faces for being the biggest of the bunch. He's about proportionally maybe the same size as some of the other figures, but his domed head certainly does give him a little bit bigger proportions, a little bit further up his torso here. Slightly lighter on the accessory end of things, Many Faces does come included with a comic, the very same comic that we've had a look at before, Double Trouble. And inside this comic, just in case you're curious, this one I did actually order online from a US website. And because of that, I was gifted the idea that I actually have some dialogue so I can make out actually what's going on. It's just certainly one of those circumstances. I'm not going to be having a ruined day by all of this. I'm not going to go sit in a corner somewhere and start weeping like a child. But yeah, it's kind of a shame that you get some of these comics locally and they just don't have any dialogue or fun stuff going on here, like Orko yelling, "Ah!" Don't have that in a local comic. So again, maybe one of the blessings of ordering these online, especially from a US selling store. I think I actually ordered this from Entertainment Earth. They did give the US one. So of course, with that, you have the dialogue actually inside the comic. Can't beat that at all. To come also include with Many Faces, part of my pronunciation of him, I always just want to call him Many Faces, but I know somebody's going to say that's not really how you actually call him. He comes included similar to his vintage counterpart, this blaster pistol. The thing about this pistol, not that it reminded me of it then, but it certainly reminds me now as an adult being able to recall this as a child. When you first went to the dentist, or earlier on in your life when you went to the dentist, and maybe the technology was a little bit more primitive, this reminds me of the gun that they used, I think, to zap something in your teeth. It usually was guarded, of course, so that the person who was doing it to your teeth was shielded from the laser. But it looked like one of those little laser things, the tools that the dentist used for your teeth. How's that for something to compare it against? It's all molded here in orange plastic. And it does have, some decent detailing done to it with an extremely long-looking handle. You can take the extremely long handle and you can fit it into only one of his hands because the other hand is one of those opened hand varieties. So there's really not much you can actually do with it other than Many Faces, perhaps looking for a tip for his performance to the king. Go ahead and take the blaster and fit it into his hand. And like I said, he holds that in his hand. Perhaps he has done dentistry on the side of, outside of just being a guard for the Master Universe, and of course the actor portraying and playing his roles for King Randor. Yeah, at least it's a fun-looking accessory, but that makes up the majority of all the things that come included with the figure. Let's go ahead and take that out of his hands. Interesting thing about Many Faces, though, is depending on which figure that you picked up either online or in stores, there's 3 variants to this figure, but it's all pretty much the exact same figure. What differs, though, is depending on which one you get in the packaging, his face does change. Well, his face does change anyways, but there are 3 variations to the packaging. Kind of clever on Mattel's part. It's sort of as a way to chase down the other versions that you maybe don't already have, even though it's technically the exact same figure. Now, the one that I got was the robot in packaging. But again, there's the monster packaging and there's also the hero packaging. they're all the exact same, and they're all the exact same figure. So again, if you want to track those down, if you are somebody that likes mint on card, you can track down 3 different variations of many faces. The detailing on the figure is pretty accurate to the original vintage counterpart. This was one of the earliest figures I had in my collection. Again, I was strange as a child collecting Masters figures. I was always getting the Stratos and Mechanic and like many faces, but I never really got a Man-at-Arms till later on. Same with He-Man. Many faces, along with Ram-Man, may have been my earliest pickups, along with Zodak. Keep on calling him Zordak. Let's get a closer look at his face, because obviously that's the big sell of it. His name, after all, tells you what exactly he does, and that is the fact he does have man-y faces, many faces. This one I decided to start this review more so looking at his hero, and then from there we would switch it to these other ones as well. And they all work the exact same way. You'll see there's a dial on the top with 3 notched points. All you have to do is simply just rotate it, similar to, again, the original vintage line, and we'll switch it to the robot. This is the way the figure arrived in packaging to me. Or one other turn of the dial at the top there reveals then the monster face. The original figure had this, but I believe that the original torso was all attached to his head. The nice thing about this one is it does actually have head articulation. So not only does it actually allow you to be able to still rotate the faces, but you can in fact actually have him looking at what direction he wants to be fighting. He's not like Michael Keaton's Batman, who has to basically twist his torso to face the direction of the battle. I think that's a nice touch. I really like the fact that they included that. Unfortunately, the blue doesn't quite jive completely. This seems clearly to be a case where they've molded the blue plastic. Then down below here, it looks like this is a case where they've actually painted the blue. So again, the blue doesn't align itself perfectly, but it's pretty close. There are a lot of aspects to this figure that are painted, specifically his arms, which is something I really do want to talk about. The coloring of this flesh tone, I'm going to assume it's flesh tone, even though he looks a little on the jaundice side, is not unfortunately the same coloring as here. Here, I believe they've used the torso as this color of plastic, and then painted over top everything on top of that. The other thing, the opposite of that, applies actually when you look at the arms. The arms look like they were all molded in the blue plastic, and then Mattel has done their best to try to paint in this area here. And it doesn't, unfortunately, line the same colors up. And also, when it comes to the joints and the elbows, for example, yeah, you're going to see an area where there isn't that painted in color. It's a bit on the messy side, unfortunately. One of the problems I also had with, I think it was Trapjaw. Trapjaw was a painted in figure as well. And yeah, the paint is a little on the messy side when we're looking at Manny Face's arms, for example. The lower half of his body basically is Trapjaw. So what if you had Trapjaw in your collection? This is basically just the same lower half of that figure. I will say, though, to Manny Faces, saying it the way that I am, the bottom half of him actually is painted better than Trapjaw, though the coloring in his torso is not as quite the bright, vibrant pink that his lower legs get treated to. It's a little more on the darker plum purple instead. Flipping the figure around so you can see certainly the back of him. Trying to think in my mind, actually, if they have used many faces in the original vintage line, his mold for something else as well. Specifically this piece right here, again, like the lower legs, is Trapjaw. Looking at the articulation here now on the figure, his head rotates back and forth. Again, I'm so thrilled for the fact that they did incorporate head articulation. Sometimes, though, when you are twisting your head back and forth, you're more inclined to probably twist this accidentally as well. We'll just twist that back. But the head technically does allow you to rotate it all the way around. A nice little added bonus there as well. The waist does swivel back and forth also. He does have the hinges in the arms, so you can hinge those out. You can also rotate the arms all the way around. Quickly just interrupting myself. Can I just interrupt you for a second? Yeah, go ahead. What did you want to say? No, I actually just want to comment on the actual instructions or lack thereof. Yeah, wait a minute. There wasn't any instructions in there as either, was there? No, there wasn't. Can I step in for a second? Yes, please go ahead. This one doesn't actually have instructions, but basically the instructions are the exact same as all the other figures that we've looked at. You can pop and remove the limbs if you want to. You can also remove the torso. So again, if you want to mix and match these with other Masters figures, you can do that. There we go. And there we go. Okay, you can go ahead now. Thank you. Help yourself to a brisk. Don't mind if I do. The one thing, unfortunately, about this figure, though, is he does have slightly loose arms. more so in the elbows than anything else. Like I said, those arms do rotate all the way around. You can also rotate at the elbow and bend back and forth, and he does also have hand articulation. You can rotate that back and forth also as well. For the legs split out quite comfortably, quite easy. Many faces probably thinking, easy for you to say that. You can bring the legs forward and back as well, bend at the knees, rotate the lower leg, and the same thing, same as trap jaw. You can hinge those feet back and forth, and also ankle pivot them too. If you want to get him into his more vintage styling, so clever on Mattel's part, you can bring the legs forward, bend the knees, and then sort of compensate it with the feet. And it gives you that sort of vintage look, shortens the size of the figure. Although, unfortunately, with trap jaw, the same problem I have here with many faces is the fact that when you get him into this configuration, I think it's more so the faulting of the knees. I can't quite get him to balance straight. I think maybe a lot of it actually is the ankle, just because you can't bring the ankle further up because he's got that cuff, that top of his shin guard that covers over at the top of his ankle. Probably gives him a little more difficulty being stable and standing right. It's fine and good for me anyways, because when it comes to these figures of the Master Universe Origins variety, I like to straighten the legs myself, and I like to have them displayed with their full-length leg. That's just my own personal preference. If you prefer to have them at least in that vintage style, then yes, just crouch the legs, bend the knees, bend the ankles, and you can make them look a little bit more like their vintage counterparts. Many Faces is a figure I recall getting pretty early into collecting Master Universe as a kid. Though again, the order of getting these figures is still a bit of a blur. Was it Zodak was the first one? Was it Ram Man? Was it Mechanic? Or was it Many Faces himself? Unfortunately, chalk that up to old age, and a memory fleets over time. The things that you want to hold on to as a kid as memories end up just trickling out of your ear while you're sleeping in favor of making space and room for things like responsibilities around the house, bills, and jobs you have to go to. Man, it sucks sometimes being an adult. What I do remember, though, recall quite vividly, is getting Many Faces as a birthday present from a friend of mine in public school. It was, again, one of my favorite figures I had in my collection because he had the ability to spin his face to 3 different unique faces. He still also had that vintage orange gun that is replicated quite nicely here in the Masters of the Universe Origins line. Still that gun, talking about memories, I remember having that gun pointed at my teeth in a dentist chair. And in fact, it was orange as well. There was a little shield guard, I guess, to block the laser that was going to be shot at my teeth. Because, of course, the person that was working on my teeth had to protect their eyes. I don't recall back then we even had things to cover our own eyes. But that's sort of one of the things that you had to deal with when you were a kid going to the dentist. Many Faces, though, like I said, keeps a lot of the original things still intact. The flipping of the face. One thing that is nice about this figure that I don't recall the original having is actually that he can actually rotate his head. How about that? So not only can you flip his face to 3 different distinct portraits and personalities, but you can also rotate his head. I think that's pretty fun as well. The articulation is still something that stays the same with all the Master Universe Origins figure. Unfortunately, the figure does have some difficulty putting him in his vintage pose, because he has the same difficult legs that Trapjaw had. If you haven't seen my review of Trapjaw, go check it out. I think a lot of it is probably, I think now the more I think about it, is probably the ankles. Because he does have the little guards that cover down the point that you bend the ankle at, I think it caused a little bit more difficulty getting him in that vintage pose. Doesn't bother me too much because I'm not really going to be displaying these figures in vintage poses as well. And again, I think it's super clever on Mattel's part. Simply just bending the knees, you can call them vintage poses. You're literally just taking a figure and bending them at the knees. Ridiculous. Anyways, a great looking figure. Again, if you are somebody that likes to collect mint on card, Many Faces has the distinct award of being a figure that gets released in 3 different looks. The monster, the robot, the human. You can actually pick them all up, mint on card, with 3 of the very distinct faces on display. I don't think I'm probably going to do that because already up to this point, none of the figures I've collected for Master Universe are ones that I've kept sealed on card. Just the availability of them are hard enough as is to find them as it goes right now as a Canadian. I don't want to consider then having to buy a second set just to keep them sealed. Although I will say the vintage look of the card really does have me awfully tempted to see if I can pick up at least a couple of these that we've looked at before and keep those ones sealed while keeping the other ones on display. What do you guys think of Many Faces? Let me know certainly down below in the comments section. And of all the 3 faces that he spins his face to, which is your favorite? I kind of think I settle a little bit more on the robot. I think that was the one that was my favorite as a kid, and it's probably my favorite to this day. Do you like the heroic human? Do you like the robot? Or do you like the monster as your favorite? Let me know down below in the comments section. And hey now, while you're down there doing things anyways, I mean, you're in the area anyways, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button down below, that you're turning the bell notification on, and that, yes, you're coming back to this channel regularly, as there's always new videos popping up and coming your way. And as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.